Calling all SCP Foundation staff, This is Dr. Theron Sherman, broadcasting anomalously from Site-42. Do you read us? Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Site-42 using your Foundation-issued encrypted YouTube account. That is right, we do not want you to be sharing Foundation-classified videos using your civilian YouTube account. Steve, we had to amnesticize the entire city of Detroit last time you did that, you big jerk. All right, we got word from Amber that we are coming through on the stream, so let's go live in 3, 2, 1. Hey there, Foundation staff. This is Sherman, but you can call me Sherm. Welcome to another anomalous broadcast from Site-42. For those of you unfamiliar with our show, the rundown goes like this. Number 1, I read you an SCP document or tale or something from the SCP Wiki. B, I open up the floor to the community to discuss what we've read. We're often visited by SCP authors, staff, and fans, and if we're lucky, the article themselves shows up to share some insight. I also check the chat throughout so I can see questions and ask those if they come up as well, or answer them in tonight's case. Remember that if you'd like to join the conversation yourself, I will be monitoring the chat and answering questions from there, as will my guest if that comes up. While my guest is listening in, it would be prudent to open up a silent YouTube window with the video running. That way you can see the chat as well, mysterious guest who I have not introduced. Also, remember that if you enjoy the show and ignore that fourth wall break, leave a like and a comment to let us know, subscribe and hit the bell, and if you really want to help us out, become a patron at patreon.com/site42. And remember, tonight's stream is brought to you by Site-42's merch store. We have a bevy of SCP art, t-shirts, cell phone cases, things like that, commissioned from artists in the SCP community. So we like to support independent artists here just as much as anyone else. So you can check the link in the description to go check that out for yourself and help us pay the rent. Tonight's show, we are going over SCP-5542, titled Cake by the Ocean, written by yours truly. This is my new SCP. Woo! And luckily, the author is here to talk about it. Yes, I am. Nice to talk to you, too. No, tonight, our guest is a friend of mine and Goose's, who is going to bring us some scholarly insight into the writing process. Please give a big Site-42 welcome to Nutmeg. Nutmeg, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Nutmeg, and my pronouns are they, them.
Excellent. Welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about your writing habits, background, experience, education, stuff like that. What's your credentials?
Oh boy. Okay, so where shall I start? From the very beginning with my birth. No, actually, I remember I was an avid reader actually since I was very, very young. I remember being perhaps 6 or 7 years old and being very proud of myself for reading my first novel. But by 11, I decided that I wanted to be a writer, and I've been writing on and off basically throughout that time. I went to school and got an associate's degree in English. Yes, I'm highly educated. But beyond that, I've continued avidly reading. I have currently a habit of daily reading. It's something that it took a long time for me to really get myself to do, but that's important towards the writing experience. I feel in order to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader too. I've been writing every day since, for like 3 or 4 years now. And I have participated in National Novel Writing Month 6 times, and I've managed to complete the challenge 3 times. And I think that's about it. There could be more, but I don't remember right now.
You said you write every day. How much do you write every day?
So far I'm averaging at about 1,600 words a day. I do fluctuate between 1,000 and 2,000 just on a day-to-day basis.
Now, viewers, the reason that I have brought Nutmeg on is to look at my article, SCP-5542, from the perspective who has more education in writing and more practice in writing than your average habitual hobbyist writer, I'll call it. And while I am not the most pristine, I'm actually probably in the lower rung of SCP authors when it comes to like output. I think I have 7 articles. I think I average 1 a year. So not exactly prolific. For my experience, I am a theater college dropout who specifically dropped out because I was failing English too. So take that as it were. And I learned how to write from balancing writing community theater, anime, video game, fanfic scripts for shows at below the community theater level. And that wasn't just me. That was with a team of 5 people writing these scripts. And then my only other claim of writing credit is that I ran a 2-year-long D&D campaign where I was the DM. And so that is the entirety of my writing career before coming to the SCP Foundation and writing what I've written. So I am hoping that we can get some scholarly insight to help a poor hobbyist like me.
Well, I hope I can provide.
And you are familiar with the SCP community and online writing experience as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I back in 2010, possibly even earlier than that, I stumbled across the SCP wiki. I think those were the early days. I'm not 100% positive on that. But during that time, I was way into particularly creepypasta and effectively community storytelling. And so when I found it, I just binge read as much as I could. And since then, I haven't actually participated in the community. I haven't written any articles or anything for SCP. But, you know, periodically, I would say maybe once every year or a couple of years, I would go back and binge read some more. Although admittedly, I haven't done that for a few years now. However, I did participate in very briefly in the online community known as the Holders series. That one's an old one. And I actually contributed a story for that. And last I checked, it was in the top 11, I think, of the top 11 highest rated of all of them. But I don't know what it is now. So, but I wrote that when I was like 19. So
very dope. So as we go into, right before we go into 5542 right now, what are a couple differences that you would see from your perspective when you're critiquing something that's longer form writing versus online flash fiction?
I actually haven't spent a whole lot of time critiquing longer form writing because it is a huge time investment, and the writing group that I was part of for a while focused primarily on either a chapter at a time or on short stories. So I'm mostly just going to tell you off the top of my head what I can think of might be differences. In terms of longer form writing versus flash fiction, longer form writing, I think I would tend to focus more on the overarching ideas and the overall characterization of the protagonist, the antagonist, the deuteragonist, so on and so forth. I would focus a lot perhaps on plot, pacing, and structure, which of course would be true of flash fiction too, and so on and so forth. But with flash fiction, I think the main difference there would be because it has to sort of be distilled down to one idea, I might get a little more granular. Although I'm not sure I would qualify SCP articles as flash fiction, because flash fiction tends to be just a few hundred words at most, in my experience anyway. But with that in mind, like with a shorter piece, you have to really, you'd have to narrow in on perhaps paring down extra stuff to really get to the core idea, the core emotional part of the story. Of course, SCP articles are very different in their structure. So I don't know. We'll see where that goes today.
Indeed. I think the one thing I've heard on the subject that stuck in my brain, at least in this moment, is that someone once said that short form fiction can be more difficult if only because you do not have space to elaborate.
Yeah, I would certainly say so in my experience.
All right. And luckily, SCP-5542 is a pretty short one, so I'm going to go ahead and perform this reading, and then we will question and answer this thing after. All good?
Yep, good to go.
Let's do it, starting from the top. Item number, SCP-5542. Object class, Euclid. Special containment procedures. The parcel of land SCP-5542 is located at is currently held by a Foundation shell company, Singh, Chang, and Partners. A standard perimeter has been established under cover story retiree timesharing. Objects recovered from the property are kept in cold storage at Site-42 pending further testing. Investigation into Person of Interest 5542, see Addendum 5542-A, is ongoing. Description: SCP-5542 is a section of California coastline that is composed of cake to an average depth of 2.5 meters. Walking on the surface of the beach is possible despite the composition, while purposefully digging downwards past 2 centimeters reveals non-anomalous cake. The effect is contained entirely within the property lines of 1812 Sea Ledge Lane, a beachfront residence. Discovery: on December 15, 2020, Foundation agents embedded in the Santa Barbara Police Department were alerted to a potential anomaly during an altercation between an officer and a local psychic detective, claiming he'd had a vision of, quote, multiple people disappearing on a beach made of cake at the given address. After cross-referencing with open missing persons cases in the Campanile area and an interview with the psychic and a corroborating witness, the agents decided to take over the investigation. Class B amnestics were administered to all civilians involved. Addendum 5542-A. Investigation Log. Investigation of the property and an attempt to contact the property owner were authorized on December 15, 2020, for the following day. A partial transcript of the agent's body camera footage is logged below. Begin log, December 16, 2020, 1600 hours, 32 minutes. Agents Roday and Hill activate their body cameras on arrival to the property. Roday speaks first. You see any cameras on the house? No. No fences, no cameras. Security's pretty lax for a house in this neighborhood. Right. Let's hit the beach. Agents exit their vehicle and proceed along the side of the house towards the beach behind the property. See, this is the kind of place I want to get once I make 05. You? 05? You got your hand stuck in the infinite peanut butter jar and flooded the men's locker room last week. I was hungry. They can't disqualify me for that. You're lucky you're not stuck in some basement dictating the database onto audio logs. Ugh, yeah, Theron needs to get some sun. Hello, self-deprecating humor again. Agents reach the beach behind the house. Agent Roday digs his hand into the sand, grasping a handful of chocolate cake. He attempts to taste it before Agent Hill grabs his wrist. Come on, son. Eat an anomalous beach cake. I was only going to taste it. Put it down. Agent Roday drops the cake. Agent Hill uses an evidence bag to retrieve a sample. All right. The beach is cake. Confirmed. Interrogate the family? Interrogate the family. Hey, sorry. Interrogate the family. Let's go. Hey, don't wipe that on me. I just got this uniform cleaned. Agents start towards the front of the property. How are you and Celine doing? You know how it is. We're taking some time apart to find she dumped you. She said I was keeping secrets from her, man. That's your entire job. You gotta get better at keeping the fact that you're keeping secrets, dude. Shut up. Agents reach the front of the property and proceed to the front door. Agent Hill lifts his hand to knock on the door. It opens before he makes contact. Engelbert Leckermall, property owner based on public records, approximate age 55, stands in the doorway. Well, hello there, constables. How can I help you today? Hello, sir. Call me Birdie. Birdie, right. I'm Officer Spencer. This is Officer Grimm. We're here to ask you some questions about some disappearances in this area. Oh, wow. I'd be happy to help in any way that I can. Come on in. We'll talk inside. Agents enter the residence. As they pass the living room, a teenage male is sprawled on one of the couches, wearing headphones. The wife is at La Cumbre working on a tennis game. Wish she would take that boy with her. He could use some exercise. Getting a little plump around the frame, if you know what I mean. Right. We're investigating a rash of disappearances of local youths. How tragic! Such an awful waste of potential. Yeah, the kids were last seen in this neighborhood. You haven't seen anybody shady around lately, have you? Not that I've noticed. My family and I have lived here for ages. We know everyone, and I haven't noticed any perfidious persons, no sir. The group arrives in the kitchen. Coffee? No thank you. I'd love some. Leckermall places 2 disposable coffee pots into an elaborate coffee machine. Got this beauty when we renovated the kitchen. Empty night, the double-wide oven cost as much as my car, but the missus had to have her domain be state-of-the-art. Amen that. Back to the investigation. I was wondering if you had any problems with trespassers. We've had complaints from some of the neighbors about local kids sneaking onto the private beaches to party. Of course, it happens all the time, but we're not as stuck up as some of the community. Leckermall raises his pinky finger in a mocking gesture. Amen again. But Bertie, let's cut to the chase. Pounds his hand on the counter. Why is your section of beach literally made out of cake? Leckermall and Agent Hill stare at Agent Roday. What in blazes are you on about? Yeah, dude, it's completely edible. There's no way that could have happened without you knowing. You can't be serious. As a witch in a tornado. We checked ourselves before we came to the door. Your beach is somehow cake instead of sand. It seems impossible, but there it is, written in the frosting. You know what? This is probably an elaborate prank from my Alpha Tau Omega brothers, those incorrigible rogues. You know, UC Santa Barbara. Go Gauchos! The coffee maker beeps. Leckermall moves to retrieve the coffee. They excavated your backyard beach and replaced it with cake? Leckermall hands a mug to typo from my own article. Great. Hands a coffee mug to Agent Roday. I don't know how they got the dean's car on top of the roof either. These pranks get better every year. Why don't we head out back and show you the situation? Leckermall starts towards the back of the house. Agent Roday moves to take a sip of his coffee before Agent Hill takes it from him. They begin to whisper to each other. What the hell was that? I thought I could get him to crack. Get the hell out of here. No, you get the hell out of here. No, go with Bertie. I'll catch up. Oh, gotcha. Agent Roday moves to follow Leckermall to the back of the property. Agent Hill takes a sample of the coffee before dumping it in the sink. End log. Extraneous data redacted. Agents Roday and Hill confirmed with Mr. Leckermall that the beach was cake before giving him a number to reach them if he had any more information. They then adjourned to their motel for the evening. Addendum 5542-B. Disappearance. On December 17th, 2020, Agents Roday and Hill returned to the address for follow-up questions. Upon arrival, Agent Roday noted that the house looked different in a, quote, hard-to-place way. Agent Hill's knock on the door caused it to fall inwards off its hinges. Investigation of the interior revealed that the house was now vacant. Agent Roday described the residence as decrepit, as if it had been abandoned for decades, with the sole exception being the kitchen, where Agent Hill noted that the room smelled as if someone had been cooking, in line with Agent Roday's observation that the oven was still warm. Further forensic analysis found evidence suggesting that the aged sections of the home had been abandoned for upwards of 40 years, where the appliances in the kitchen were found to be less than a month old and otherwise non-anomalous. Food items recovered from the kitchen included fresh and frozen meats, dried and cured meats, otherwise known as jerky, bottles of wine, baked goods and components for baking, flour, yeast, etc., disposable coffee pods. Laboratory analysis revealed the meat to be human flesh, while the other foods also tested positive for human DNA. End article. And that's it. Short, sweet, straight to the point. That's our reading.
All
Oh, and
right.
Amber in the chat says, and the cake is a lie. Wait, wrong fandom. Damn it, I should have put a cake is a lie in there joke somewhere.
No, you can't have two.
No, because obviously the
That's
cake is true. It's not a lie at all. The cake is anomalous.
Old meme
That's
is old.
All right, so that is the article. I am not used to being on the asking questions side of this show, so do you have a starting place for us?
Yes, I do. Hold on, just see. I have notes. I have organized notes. I promise. All right, I'm going to start with just full disclosure. These are questions that I asked you earlier throughout the week to kind of get a sense of how to gear my critique. But it does, I think it's important for all of you at home to kind of understand the thought process behind all of this, both from my side as someone asking questions and someone looking for tools to critique with, and from SCHRM's side as someone answering questions, obviously, and what his intent was with this piece. So the first question that I asked was, what tone were you trying to strike with this piece? I picked up on some kind of balance of humor and horror, but roughly what ratio would you say you were aiming for? And can you give me examples of other SCP entries which you felt managed to nail that tone?
And yes, to complete your disclosure from the week, we have been talking about this week because sometimes your critique on the fly in the moment, you actually want more time to think about it. So that is why these questions have been questioned and answered in advance. My answer in advance to this one, I would say I was aiming for about 70% comedy, 25% mystery, and 5% horror. As much gore as squick as we see on the SCP Wiki, I'm a little desensitized to it. We get a lot of screaming, bloody things. I just did the Drain Snake episode this past week where that's hideous. And so I'm a little desensitized to the gore, and I was actually a little shocked when someone in the discussion of the article said that that last bit about the food being human remains was a, quote, cheap trick at surprising horror, because personal to me, I didn't think that food made of people was that shocking compared to what we normally see on the wiki, but to each their own.
And as for the what did you manage to find?
Oh, you're right. You're right. I forgot the last bit.
Yeah.
The final bit was there any SCPs I was trying to like influence by or like look at as examples of? And my answer to that was I honestly couldn't, because the comedic tone and buddy cop of what I was going for here isn't something that at least I see on the wiki very often. And so my personal attempt was to inject a little comedy and a little, the buddy cop movie into SCP canon. And so the reason that this SCP became what it is comically, and the reason I chose that tone is because when we first had the concept, the idea was simply, what if Goose said, Cake by the Ocean, the song title by DNCE? It would be funny if that was an SCP, if there were a beach that were literally cake. And I said, that does sound like an SCP. And I proceeded to sit on the idea for like a month, 2 months, something like that. Because Cake by the Ocean, the beach is cake, that's an anomaly, but you normally in an SCP want to have some sort of story surrounding it. And it took me a month or so to think of, A, that it should be a Hansel and Gretel story. That's where the food being flesh came from. And so the cake by the ocean is the trap. And so why is the cake a trap? The cake is a trap to get people to eat the cake, obviously. But okay, if you have a cake that's a beach that's cake and it's a trap, you must own that beach, meaning you have a private beach, extrapolating that you would be rich if you had a house with a private beach. And so as we were looking at places that have ocean coastlines, Goose pulled up Santa Barbara, California as a place that was ritzy, as a place that was a lot of rich people who have private beaches. And immediately when Goose brought up Santa Barbara, I went, oh God, one of my favorite comedy TV shows, Psych, took place in Santa Barbara. And so Cake by the Ocean, the song, led to Cake, Beach Made of Cake, Hansel and Gretel, led to we're making Psych an SCP somehow. And that is where finally this article was inspired to be comic.
The psych was you.
Whew!
The psych was all you.
Wow, we have our full origin story here.
Exactly. And Gotcha and stuff even asked, what inspired you to make this SCP in the chat? So there you are.
Well, you were already.
All right. 2 birds with 1 stone. Okay. So my second question was, how much emotional impact do you want to hit the reader with? In particular with the twist ending.
So the feelings I was trying to aim for, I was aiming for really, once I got this psych idea, I wanted to hit the tone of an episode. And the tone of a good psych episode is, number one, that it's a police procedural. The guy's a psychic detective, a fake psychic detective. So you have mostly this comedy ride, and then at the end of the episode, they normally give a big reveal of what's going on. And so I wanted you to go in going, okay, well, they're buddy cop. This is entertaining. I'm sticking with the story because we're having a fun ride with these two. And then I wanted that last addendum to reveal what the clues I placed throughout were hoping to provide, which was the Hansel and Gretel twist. So really, this is a psych episode with a Hansel and Gretel twist, and I was hoping that you thought it was all funny. And then when you got to the end, you found out it was human remains, and you realized the cake Ming and a couple other hints that we'll probably get into later Easter egg-wise. Oh, that's what the mystery was. So I was hoping for a little bit of a twist ending.
All right. And that was actually could have been a graceful segue into question 3, which is, what are all the extra textual references that you make in the piece? And how would you tell someone who wasn't familiar with those references what purpose they have or what they're supposed to signal?
So, this is an amazing question because number one thing I've noticed about my writing specifically with this article, and it goes back into all my other articles, is I am obsessed with Easter eggs in media, but I might not know how to use them more than a surface level. Because as you go through my Easter eggs, the date of discovery is December 15th, 1215, because Hansel and Gretel was written between, or originated between the years 1200 and 1500 in the oral tradition. It was put down on paper by Grimm much, much later than that. Published in 1812, which is the house number on Sea Ledge Lane. And so we got both those numbers in there. All the names are references. Engelbert Humperdinck created a Hansel and Gretel opera back in the early 1900s, or was it the 1800s? I'm not even sure. And that starred opera singer Rosina Leckermall. And so Engelbert and Leckermall combined there for our rich bitch villain. The kid on the couch was a hint to what was going on. He was sprawled on the couch because he's about to become food. Cake by the Ocean is both a reference to the song and also the Hansel and Gretel lore. And the foodstuffs being upgraded, the double wide oven, which I'm not even sure is a real thing. They are. We did look that up. They are real things. You can get a double wide oven that makes it easier to fit a person. The bougie kitchen, and the kitchen still being bougie, is that way because whatever power this entity has to mask things or change things, it turned the beach into cake. It either bought all this tech for the kitchen or it magicked it. One way or the other, I don't know. But then it didn't bother with the rest of the house. It just made it an illusion because that's not necessary to the people eating. All you need is the kitchen. When you get into psych-specific references, Rode and Hill are the last names of the actors who portray the main characters. Celine is the girlfriend character of the Hill character. The personalities are based on the two characters, Sean and Gus, to the point where Rode acting immaturely and outbursting during the interrogation, and Hill being the one who smelled the cooking going on, because several episodes involve Gus's super sniffer. And during the opening scene, the altercation with a local psychic detective, there's a constant motif of Sean, the psychic detective in Psych, being dragged out of the police station because he's bothering people and causing a fuss. And so I wanted him to be in there actually doing the thing he's always doing. I think I nailed the Easter eggs. Did I miss anything?
Let them eat cake.
Ah, yes, and we have a small bit of Marxist perspective in the opposing fact that, let them eat cake is the common phrase, but today, it's not eat the rich. The rich are obviously eating us. Bum, bum, bum.
Very loud.
All right. Cool.
So many.
And there are a couple more questions that I asked you just to, again, this is to gear my feedback. Which parts of this piece are you most confident about?
So, this is where I get into my co-author a little bit. This article is not just by me. This is also co-authored with another one of Goose's friends, Gloomy. Gloomy has been on our show. She is an SCP author. She's got like 2 articles. This one's her 3rd one. And I went to her because I needed some critique, because Katie and I worked on this. I'd gone through a couple authors in my Discord server who gave it a couple run-bys. We changed a little bit here and there. But Gloomy earned a co-author credit because everything that is not dialogue was completely rewritten by Gloomy. And what she did is she essentially took my prose, which is very simplistic and layman's. It's, if you go back to my article, for everyone who's watching for later reading, if you go back to my last article, SCP-5886, The Ballad of Jim Biggio, that one did not go through extensive rewrites the way that this one did. I pretty much wrote that article in one night, got the idea onto paper, had a couple people look at it who mostly said it was good, just had like a couple tweaks here and there. And so you'll see the difference in my prose in that it's very simplistic and it's not exactly clinical the same way that a lot of SCP articles are. I'm like halfway there in my ability to write clinical tone compared to what a lot of the SCP authors are used to. So when Gloomy got to that, she knocked it out of the park, rewrote everything I wrote. I went back in and altered some things here or there to make sure my story beats were still in there. Like, for one example, there's a specific point where I say 1812 Sea Ledge Lane, comma, a beachfront residence. And Gloomy's line did not include that final clause of a beachfront residence. But I really, really wanted that in there because I wanted to push the idea that this is a private house. This is a private beach. This is rich people. This is something I didn't want missed in the subtext. I wanted to be full text that this is a private house, private beach, so that you knew that. But beyond that, she pretty much rewrote everything of my clinical tone of the science sections. What she didn't do... And so, by far, that is what I am most confident about because I didn't do it. So I don't have to feel self-conscious about it. But as she went through it, I'm just like, oh, damn, yeah. Everything you're changing is amazing. And if I make a couple tweaks to save the story, this is fantastic. And so I'm actually really happy with the clinical tone portions at the beginning and the end as bookends for where the universe is. When it goes to the dialogue section, this is 1.5. in answering the question, because the question is, what am I most confident? What am I least confident about? The dialogue section is what I am like middling confident about. What happened in that writing process, and here is my tangent for this section. I normally like to get projects done in one go. It drives me crazy to leave something unfinished, even for a day. That's why my last article was written in one night, critiqued by who was available, and posted. This one, I put it away for a night, and I came back the next day. And it's definitely a lot better for it. So my writing process, I understand that giving things time will improve things.
You were so mad that night.
It's just my ADHD brain doesn't like it.
You were so mad.
My brain lights on fire if I have to hesitate. Katie's over here saying he was so mad. He was so mad the whole time that he didn't post it. But, and so, this article, not only did Gloomy fix everything in the clinical tone, but in the dialogue section, all she asked was, can you differentiate the character voices a little more? And that led me to go through a rewrite where Rode got a little more immature. Hill got... The two characters are both immature. They're both bumbling comic characters. It's not like one's the straight man, one's not. They're both funny in their own ways, but Hill/Gus is a little more neurotic, and Rode/Sean is a little more immature and childish. So those characters definitely got differentiated there. And then Leckermall, I went full bore into this creature is probably 1,000 years old and is trying to razzle-dazzle these people into not thinking he's in trouble. He's the cause. And so he got a bunch of phrases and clauses that no one says anymore, like constables. And he talks in wild words. Amber noticed the Dresden Files reference because he used the phrase empty night, which is used by the fair folk, specifically Mab and Thomas Wraith as well. The vampires and the creatures use empty night as their curse. Harry says stars and Harry says Hell's Bells a lot more. And then Stars and Stones is for Ebenezer. So those are where those came in. And then where was I going with that? Oh yeah, and Leckermall even got a couple I'm sneaking some cannibalism references to you because two of his lines are from Sweeney Todd. He says, he's got such a plump frame for one line, and then his very next line is such an awful waste. Such an awful waste. And so he's just fucking with those officers, which brings me joy. Gloomy also gave me inspiration that we needed evidence of these cake and the coffee, that the officers would probably get evidence for testing. And so Hill got evidence baggy for the beginning cake and for the coffee at the end. But that also led me to expand the two scenes where they walk to the back of the house and talk about Rode getting to O5 and the infinite peanut butter jar, and walking to the front of the house where they talk about Hill's relationship issues. Those didn't exist. It was just they walked to the back of the house, they walked to the front of the house. And as I was rewriting the dialogue for character, I realized that those two extra scenes, they're either highly indulgent, which your mileage may vary, or they are opportunities that gave the characters more time to feel human and fleshed out and to just kind of day in the life a little bit, which adds to their humanity as you go through the story. Long story, far too long story short, too late. I am fairly confident on the dialogue because it went through these massive overhauls. And so I feel like they work pretty well, and the article has unanimous upvotes so far, so I'm pretty confident that most people are on page with it. And then the final question was, what am I least confident in? And this is the artist conundrum. I am least confident in the story as a whole structure, because my main goal was eventually to tell an entertaining little contained story, And I do think I pulled that off based on votes, based on reaction. But I am worried that there are people who did not know what Hansel and Gretel was, which blew my mind until I realized that, yeah, not everybody knows every fairy tale or fictional story or reference. And so I worry that they may not understand / get that. I'm also worried about whether you have to cater to everyone. You can't cater to everyone, so maybe that doesn't matter, maybe it does. And let's see, was there anything else to this answer? Oh yeah. And then, as an artist, I am worried that basically I just reskin Hansel and Gretel with Psych fanfiction and made an Psych Hansel and Gretel SCP crossover fic, which is essentially what I did, so yeah. I hope it works as a story. And scene.
Well, all right, cool. And so I don't really have any more questions so far, so I'm gonna dig in here. And I'm going to start by saying that I thought that you got the banter down. It did feel like these agents knew each other for a long time. They like taking the piss out of each other. And they have their own way of going about things, and they are jaded. They're not excited, and they're not worried. They're just here on a job. I definitely got that. I picked up on that. The Leckerman, I got the impression that he was kind of creepy, but not so much that it pinged off any alarm bells necessarily. Like, certainly later on, as I looked back, I noticed the reference to the plumpness, and I was like, I see what you did there. That's something that I want to make clear right now. I am actually fairly dense when it comes to particularly the first read through. I have a tendency to get caught up in the moment of the tale, and I am not very well practiced on a first read through of stepping back and regarding it with a more critical mindset. So, that being said, it is a very entertaining tale. And I think you have definitely succeeded in making it entertaining and in getting that kind of buddy cop rapport that you were aiming for, and making it comedic in tone primarily. So now here we go. Brace yourself, Sherm.
I'm ready.
I think that given how I get, wrapped up in the moment of the piece. Hold on, my cat is crossing the desk right now. Good timing, friend. Very good timing.
Has thoughts about this piece.
Yes, she does. Okay, there she goes. So having on my first read through, just getting caught up in the moment of the piece, I would say that the twist ending, the reveal, as it were, of the human flesh, the cooked human flesh, felt very jarring. Even going into it knowing that it was a Hansel and Gretel reference, I don't think I would have picked up on it if I hadn't. So I think the key to that there is that the buddy cop genre is at odds with the horror genre. There's particularly, I'm gonna in terms of this piece specifically, the rapport between the agents is very familiar. It's very humorous. The premise of the beach being made of cake is very absurd. All of that lends itself very well to comedy. But also on top of that, it shows that these agents are comfortable. Whereas horror is inherently disempowering. And on top, and additionally, these agents are part of this massive organization that effectively has infinite resources. So again, that's at odds with the horrific ending, which is to say, people were being cannibalized. And you said that you are jaded, like you come across more shocking material in SCP, and that does make a lot of sense. But I think it's very easy when that happens to lose sight of just how horrific that is. So just throwing it in there as an ending feels, I can see why it can feel cheap. And again, I know that you were referencing Hansel and Gretel, but you have to, I guess, when it comes to referencing or being inspired by something, the emotional weight still has to come through regardless of the reference or inspiration. Like ideally, when you make a reference to a different story, it enhances the reader's understanding, but it doesn't replace the feeling that you're trying to inspire in them.
And it's actually, you make a very good point there, because what I remember when you said the horror and the comedy can be at odds, I have a whole tangent about how sometimes in some films they like use comedy moments to diffuse and then horror and stuff like that, and that's not what this article is meant to be doing. But what I think about with this is, even in the show Psych, spoilers if you haven't seen the TV show Psych, most of the episodes are comic and funny, and even when the mystery is serious, things are still being like infantilized by these two screw-ups. But even when they save the day, which is most of the time. But there's like one episode a season where a serial killer shows up and targets the main cast. Someone like the main character's girlfriend or something, or the main character's parents. And in that episode, the comedy definitely like mostly disappears, and it becomes like almost 7 level of like suspense compared to the rest of the series.
Yeah. And that's because comedy is an excellent tool for diffusing tension. It is, in fact, the whole point of comedy is to diffuse tension, and that's a great tool for horror. I think I think injecting comedy into horror can make it like really shine, and also injecting horror into comedy can make it really shine too. Like one example that I thought of throughout the week, there's this movie that's called Journey to the West, Conquering the Demons. And I'm referring to the 2013 Stephen Chow and Derek Kwok film. It's a great movie. It starts off really humorous and really absurd, and it mostly maintains that tone throughout the film. However, there is one scene, which in fact has to do with cannibalizing people, where they take it totally serious and they just crank up the tension. And then, the main character fights the pig demon, which it turns out is going on. There's a pig demon in disguise at this restaurant. And it's absolutely wonderful. I would say this would be perhaps the example that I would give of what tone that you're trying to strike. So if you haven't seen that, definitely watch it. I love the balance of humor and absurdity with its darker tones. And the fighting the pig demon. Yeah, fighting the pig demon is not the only example in it either. Even from the very beginning, you can see that they're gonna balance the tones that way. So I'm not saying that comedy and horror cannot get along. That's in fact very patently untrue. So you have the pieces that you need, I feel. And I can see this going 2 different ways. And again, this is just my perspective. But I can see this going 2 different ways. You can just do straight horror with those comedy bits to kind of lure the reader into a false sense of security. And in order to do that, I would say that you would need a lot more space. And again, horror is best when the emotional core of the tale is disempowered, which unfortunately means that the agents cannot be the emotional core of the tale unless somehow they have been disempowered by this situation. And off the top of my head, one way you can change the emotional core of the tale while keeping the agents and their rapport is I don't know, have an interview with a survivor, someone who managed to escape this horrible place and is being interviewed. And this may not work. Like, I'm not sure if you necessarily want to lengthen this article because we are working fundamentally with short fiction here. But this is just, again, off the top of my head.
And actually, I've got 3 thoughts in my head at once right now, and I think I lost 2 of them, but let me try.
Sure.
So, in my chat, I've got people talking about Doki Doki Literature Club as a good example of surprise horror, and I'm certain that the way that works is better is because it is a lot of horror. It's like it sets up surprise. It gives you the basic nothing is wrong for a little while, starts to show some creep, hits you with the hard stuff, and then the rest of the game is still there. It doesn't end on the twist the way my article does. And in my head, my article doesn't actually end at the end of the article as well. And this definitely probably isn't the same for a lot of the readers, because another reference point that I now realize that I was looking at, but I didn't vocalize before, is the show Supernatural, where you have the brothers going and finding a monster of the week, and it's their job, and they're used to it, and they're hunting it down, and sometimes they get it, and sometimes it gets away. And definitely in my head, I see this as like one episode where they go in, they're like, okay, this is a routine case, we're here, and they ask the questions, the guy plays it up like he doesn't know, and then they leave him, and he gets away. And in my head, obviously, I'm the writer who came up with this idea. I, in the future, could see the following tales of Rodane Hill hunting down Leckermall and finding out what he is and investigating stuff like that. But that is also me thinking on the potential for future, and that's not on the page, which is a very important distinction.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that could be a really cool idea, continuing the article as these 2 agents can try to hunt down Leckermall. So that's another thing to add to this. But the other track that I wanted to talk about is you could go kind of in the opposite direction and try to go for dark humor or like black humor, where you take the horror of it and you make it absolutely absurd. And I guess in the context of this piece, we could make these agents so jaded that, and also make it so that as they're exploring this house, it becomes increasingly obvious that Leckermall is cannibalizing people. But they're concerned about that. They're so jaded that that doesn't even matter to them. What matters to them is that the beach is made of cake. Why is it made of cake? And so that, I think, would draw out the absurdity a lot. And also, it kind of...
remix of the article, there should be one. And what I just thought of, the way you're going at this, it's almost like an alternate universe version of this where Rodane Hill show up, the beach is cake. They go inside, they're investigating. They're finding and understanding the clues of the cannibalism. And as you said, they don't care because that's not what they're here for. And it turns out that Leckermall is not anomalous himself. He made a deal with somebody for the beach to be cake so that he could lure people in and eat them. He's just a cannibal, a rich cannibal. And then, well, no, he's not even 1,000 years old. He's just a dude who likes eating people, because you can find those online. People are like, hey, let me eat you.
If you can make a deal with someone
But
and you can make a deal for old age.
But the idea is that he makes this deal with this entity, and at the end of the story, they just ask him who the entity is, and they hunt it down, and they don't even turn him in for cannibalism. They evict him from his house because the beach is cake and they need to contain that. But they don't even turn him in because that's how cynical they are and only focused on their one job.
Right, exactly. So that's another direction that you could take it. Although the con of it is an exceedingly cynical tone, I feel, and it also makes the characters a lot less likable because it's clear that they don't care about the victims. They only care about getting the job done, which may make the humor feel a little thin, at least between them. It may make that rapport feel kind of leave a bitter taste in your mouth.
You'd have to write something pretty well to keep that level of dark humor with that subject matter.
It'd be like the Gravity Falls FBI agents.
Right. So, and there's a lot that can be done to humanize these two agents beyond that point. But again, that's expanding on the piece probably a significant amount. And so this is just like the surface of the story here that I'm discussing right now. But you did mention that you were a little afraid that you didn't do much with the Hansel and Gretel reference. And that's actually what I would like to discuss next. Folklore is kind of my thing, trademark. So I got actually really excited that you explicitly said that you wanted to actually use the folklore in your story in a substantial way. So the thing about, with all folklore, but specifically talking about Hansel and Gretel here, is it represents the cultural anxiety of the time. So at that time, there were massive famines, and also there was no birth control. So as a result, infanticide was, yes, we're getting really dark here. I guess content warning, everyone. We're going to be talking about some pretty dark things that happened in the past.
Just 5 seconds. Just 5 seconds. Hey, chat. I'm not searching the internet to eat people. I'm talking about news articles. I definitely don't eat people. I definitely don't eat people. Okay. Okay.
He eats freshly, not people.
Oh gosh, where was I? I got a little wrapped up in the whole eating people thing.
So it was a product of the times. Infanticide was a big thing.
Yeah, infanticide was unfortunately a major tool of family planning, I guess you could say. And additionally, it wasn't just babies, it was also children. And one of the ways that they would do that was by abandoning them in the woods. Another angle of it is that there was a lot of death in childbirth. And so there were a lot of fragmented families and a lot of remarriages. And that's why you keep seeing the evil stepmother being a thing. It's because there was, remarriage was such a common thing. And there was a lot of tension usually around the new person and the old family, particularly some other political things like, your children from your first wife are probably going to inherit most of your worldly goods or whatever. Now, to be fair, I haven't extensively researched the cultural context of Hansel and Gretel in particular. So, I absolutely could be wrong, but I did look into it a little bit at least. And of course, you see the motif of the old unmarried hag, the witch in the woods. That's very, very common in these folk tales. And naturally, that represents this kind of anxiety of an independent, unmarried woman with her own inexplicable power. That's really, really scary because you don't know, you can't control her, you can't predict what she's going to do. And so often that ends up being the societal scapegoat and that kind of thing. And the hag ends up being a representation of all of those particular anxieties in that regard. Funny enough, it can also be an empowering figure. That being said, this hag is very powerful, and maybe she doesn't make it to the end of the story, but she gets to do her own thing the whole time. So that's another angle to consider it from. That being said, what you have done is you've kind of turned all that on its head, and I think that's pretty cool. Particularly given as you you wanted a more Marxist angle. I think it's a neat subversion that you switch this old unmarried hag who is an outsider, who is very scary and menacing, to a wealthy patriarch of a family. It's in fact a reversal of the folktale, because usually the status quo is the family led by the patriarch. That's where you're home. That's where you're safe. But in this case, it's the opposite. I think that's pretty cool. And there's a lot of potential there too with this Marxist messaging that you're trying to get across, which is to say wealthy, powerful men eating the rest of us. I do want to refocus though, because Hansel and Gretel is a story about children and what happens to them. And I think actually you have a lot of potential there with this, because children are by no means free from the influence of wealthy, powerful men. In fact, there are, shall we say, particular ways in which wealthy, powerful men can and do abuse children. I'm not going to name any specifics here. I don't want to get too spicy. But I think, and also it can become a little more metaphorical, because in some sense, some of the wealthiest people in this world are massive contributors to climate change, and they are taking away future generations' future. So that's another angle that can take. You can keep it open like that. You can let people interpret how they will. One thing to be alert to, and I'm not saying that this piece has to. I'm not saying that it's bad in the case of this piece, but in taking out the old hag, you are minimizing the roles of A, women, and B, outsiders in this tale. And yes, she is a villain, but there's a long history of marginalized people co-opting and owning villains for a sense of empowerment. So, like ideally we want our protagonists, we want our marginalized people to be protagonists, or rather any character at all without much comment. Like it should be normal for them to show up without justification. But failing that, at least there's someone there that someone can identify with. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case in this particular tale. However, this is something that I personally would urge you to be alert to, because the problem happens is when it becomes a pattern. So like you can decide, okay, in this tale, I don't want any women, and that's fine. You could say in this tale, I'm trying to say specific things, and that requires male characters, and that's fine. But if you start doing that unconsciously and you start doing that with more and more articles, that's when it becomes an issue.
It is incredible that you brought that up, because I don't remember how long it was after I wrote the article and published it that I realized, oh shit, there is not one character who is not a dude in this. The psychic detective gets a throwaway line, still a dude in my brain at least. It doesn't have to be. It could be, it's not written, but it was when I wrote it in my head. So authorial intent. The closest I got to representation at all is that in my mind, Rode and Hill are the ethnicities of the characters from the show, but still, you're right. It's a bunch of dudes. And I was like, crap, as soon as I published it.
Yeah, and like I said, that can be okay. It doesn't, not every tale has to be a shining example of representation. However, yes, absolutely do be alert to that. And there are some ways that you can fix that too. It's not like that this tale has to be dudes only. Like, for example, going back to earlier, if we're talking about interviewing someone, a survivor, that survivor could be a little girl. That survivor could be a little girl and her sister. And of course, we don't want to, there's always going to be obstacles to overcome regardless. But something to be alert to is the fact that now you have two little girls and they were victims. How can you make them people? Because I think that's the key. We don't want them to just be victims. We want them to be people. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, and I think that you really could absolutely take the Hansel and Gretel thing and incorporate it into this story. But again, you're going to need to expand on it. You're going to need to work a little harder to earn it, in my humble opinion.
It's a good opinion. The I don't know if you're watching the chat, but they are enjoying this show.
Well, I'm very glad.
Yeah, I don't know if I intend to go back and rewrite this since it's done. This critique, since it's post-publishing, but it's the SCP Wiki, anything can be edited by the author after the fact. So this may be a thing where in a month I have an idea for this interview with a victim, and they have a character, and maybe they got away due to X, Y, and Z, and the gumption of their like escape method or something. I don't know how to add. So Goose brought up an interesting thing, which is maybe a preview scene where they interview a victim. We get the story of where that comes from. And, well, okay, what did you exactly say?
I said a preview scene like they have in cop shows that shows the crime occurring before it's been discovered.
Yeah, so in case you could not hear that because Goose is on the couch across the room, Goose was talking about having like a preview scene like cop shows where you see the crime happen and maybe they don't tell you who done it, but they show you the crime is happening. That way you have a inciting incident for the rest of the show. And one limitation in the SCP format is that we're looking at essentially an after action report of everything that took place. So our prose doesn't have that like pre-line so much. But if we put that in after, if it were like an interview log or some blah, it would have to be an interview log with the victim telling us what happened. Possibly before they go investigate with Leckermall, or possibly after the fact.
Or they go to Gus, and that's how he has to.
Yeah, and I think you can even intersperse interviews as well. You can start building the mystery by introducing through interview, perhaps, of the Beachmid of Cake. And then after the agents go to investigate and find nothing, you get in, or maybe in an addendum after that, even beyond that, you could have an interview of a survivor or something like that. You may want to break it up a little more than that.
They could find someone under the bed in one of the abandoned rooms, and they could talk to that person during the like post investigation.
Yeah, that's definitely a thought.
A live person under the bed, but like a crab.
So, and
You would smell that.
gosh, I'm also trying to figure out how to build it up so that when we hit the addendum where they find the people jerky, we are a little more emotionally prepared for it. Not that I think that it shouldn't be shocking. I think it should be shocking, but I feel like I guess it has to go with that earn it. It's like jump scares. Jump scares only work when you create an atmosphere for it, an effective atmosphere to build up tension. So, gosh, what's one way we can do that? There has to be something that happens. I guess more suspicious activity happening throughout the house. Maybe after they interview this guy, they decide to investigate further, a little more on the down low. Maybe there's some kind of basement. That's pretty classic, right? Or something to that effect. And, the more that they investigate the grounds, the more that or maybe they find, I don't know, a finger bone buried somewhere or something to that effect. Just like little pieces here and there to indicate that something a lot shadier is going on here. Like, yeah, this guy was pretty shady, but he seems within the normal realm of shady. But then, like, as time goes on and they find more and more things, and you might be able to get away with making it a little more ambiguous, but I think that there has to be some kind of definite clue that there's more going on here than meets the eye, aside from this guy being a creep. So that's That's the idea that I have. I don't know if that works for you. And again, it's going to require you to expand on this piece. So
Yeah, I didn't go into this with a word limit or anything like that. I just wanted to tell the story that I had. And if more comes to it and that gets added in, that would be interesting. And thinking about like basement or finger bones, or like one of them finds the girl during the initial investigation, finds a living person hiding somewhere that, like, as Katie said, it's the La Poisson scene from Little Mermaid, where Leckermall is trying to deflect the suspicions of the Foundation agents while looking for the girl who is lost at the moment. While the agents split up, one of them is handling Leckermall, the other one finds the girl and maybe gets her out of there. And then our more in depth of what's going on goes like, they get her back to the motel with them, they discuss what's happened, they debrief her, and then they go back the next day and the guy has flown the coop. Could be one of many ways we could take this.
yeah, I think that works really well. And I also like the added tension of how Leckermall has to distract the agents, or attempt to distract the agents, while also trying to find this girl of his. And that there's a lot of potential there with that interaction. You get to particularly for characterization, and how do the agents totally, how do they manage to split up and one of them flies under the radar while the other one handles Leckermall, when he's already alert to the fact that there is something suspicious on these grounds and he has to find it before the agents do. So I think that certainly has a lot of potential, and I think that's a good direction to take this piece.
Interesting. Many good thoughts in today's stream.
All right, and that's about what I had so far. Were there any questions that you had for me in terms of, I don't know, in terms of craft, in terms of building a writing habit, in terms of anything like that?
Goose is over here reminding me that the reason the article is so short is because I'm lazy and didn't want to write more. So, that's definitely part of it. As you said, you're writing right now an average of 1,600 words a day. And
yeah, but I started much smaller than that. Like 3 or 4 years ago, I was writing only a few hundred words every day. So it's like, I mean, lazy or not, just so long as you're consistent, I think you'll accomplish a lot.
You build your writing muscles. It's going to the gym. It's lifting heavier weights over time.
Right.
Yes. Since you have this different perspective from most of our fans and a lot of the SCP authorship, what sort of tips do you have for potential SCP authors?
Oh gosh. Okay.
You were talking about building a writing
tips?
habit, for instance.
Yeah, no, definitely building a writing habit. And it doesn't have to be in one direction. If that's the way you work, then that's wonderful. That's not the way I work. I tend to have several creative projects going on at once, and it helps, I feel, keep me fresh when I move from project to project. It helps me also gain a new perspective on if I'm in one mode of thinking for one project and I switch to the next one, that mode of thinking may actually help me expand on that other project more. But that's simply how I work. So in terms of building a writing habit, in terms of working up to writing every day, it can be anything. It could be a journal entry. It could be a short story. It could be a poem. It could be a chapter in a novel, or a paragraph of a chapter in a novel. It could be a particularly well thought out Facebook post. It could be a particularly well thought out Discord post. Any of those things can count. And so, once you expand your idea of writing, because it's all practice. That's what it is. It's all practice. If you're writing, you're practicing. So once you expand your idea of what writing is, I think that makes it a lot easier to build a daily writing habit. You don't have to keep yourself beholden to one thing at a time. Although, of course, if you intend to complete a longer piece, you definitely have to commit a lot more to that piece. But that's, we're talking later down the line. We're talking just building a habit here. And then I would say, come up with a daily limit for yourself. Like, I did word count for myself because I'm a bleeder. I have a tendency to take a long time coming up with my words. So if I put a time limit, I don't actually get much done. But for some people, putting a time limit, having that kind of immediate deadline helps them get the creative juices flowing. So you could say, I'm going to write 15 minutes a day. And then you're going to do it all in one go. You're going to set a timer and you're going to type as fast as you can, just get all the thoughts on the page. And that's one way to do it. Another way is the way I did it, which is to set a daily word count. And the benefit of a daily word count is you can I guess, measure your progress and how long it takes you to write a certain amount of words. I guess that's true of the time limit. So never mind. Point being is you give yourself a measurable goal, an achievable, measurable goal every day. And then you stick to it. And, easier said than done. Like, I certainly, where I'm coming from, there's a certain level of privilege in being able to do that. I take 4 or 5 hours to write 2,000 words on an average day. I have that time to spend. Not everyone does. And of course, this is for me aiming to be a professional writer. You don't have to aim to be professional. You don't. It can be a hobby, and that's totally legitimate. But there's a certain level of privilege that comes with being able to sit down and write every day, especially for that length of time. I don't have any children, so there's not that extra force, extra life thing, I guess, going on, to that, that can be unpredictable, that can, that will demand my attention, for example. And I also, I have the spoons to spare to write every day. Not everyone does. So if you can't write every day, set a day of the week or several days of the week that you can write and stick to them. Like, basically try to get a feel for your own limits and abide by those limits. And I mean, I do encourage you to push your own limits, but you got to figure out what those limits are to begin with. So that's quite a long breakdown of what you can do to build a writing habit. So,
and the biggest challenge of all really is starting to write, because 99% of people just say, I'm not a writer, I'm not a good writer, and so they don't write. And this is no longer just for writing. This is for making YouTube and TikTok videos. This is for acting, dancing. This is for everything. You are going to be bad when you start doing something because you have not practiced it. And so the best thing you can do is start doing the thing badly and repeat it and study it and look at other people's things. We mentioned reading is just as important to writing as writing is. You've got to go through the process of getting yourself started, even if it's 15 minutes a day or 1 hour a week that you set aside, so that you are doing the thing and therefore starting to do the thing, to improve the thing, to get good at the thing.
Absolutely. And that's where setting a time limit can come in, actually. When you have only 15 minutes to write and you have to start writing once the timer starts, that may help you kind of throw off all of that, throw off the internet editor, throw off all of those qualms, and then start to write. Of course, you would have to know what you're writing to begin with. I feel like I like to be prepared in that sense, but some people don't. Some people can just start right at go and go. So, I guess experiment, figure out what works for you, find writing prompts and see if they resonate with you. I personally absolutely hate writing prompts. I find them to be primarily really gimmicky. But some of my more compelling stories have come from writing prompts, which is a fact that I resent so much. But, that shows you that, just because I don't like them doesn't mean they don't work for me. So I would recommend that you give writing prompts a shot. You give 15 minutes daily free writing, or every other day free writing, or a couple times a week free writing a shot. Another thing that I've heard someone say is pick a time, like figure out when you're freshest or when you're at your most creative. For me, it's first thing in the morning, and decide that at this time from 8 to 8:15 or whatever, I'm going to write, and then stop, and then just and then in the next week, pick a different time where you'll have time. Say, okay, how about from noon to noon 15? I'm going to write then. And you do that and you stop. And after you do that, you can change it up every week. You can change it up every day. Eventually, you're going to want to change it up every day, or, every day that you choose to write, that is. And that actually can help you be able to call upon your creativity on command. I personally haven't done this. The thought is a little intimidating to me, but I've heard that it has done wonders for a lot of people. Because that's the real thing, is you just gotta let go, and you gotta let your creativity come through, and that's where your inspiration comes from. Don't wait for it to come. You gotta train it to come, and you gotta be ready for it too. And that's the craft side of things. That's the practicing side of things. If you're not inspired, you are still preparing to be inspired.
And this is where deriding writing prompts as not your favorite thing in the first place, but it can be a good exercise to be like, hey, cake by the ocean, make it a story. X thing, make it a story. How? I don't know. Extrapolate X, extrapolate Y, extrapolate Z. Find your way down the stairs of storytelling.
Right. All right. Any other questions, either from you, Sherm, or from the crowd?
The chat looks pretty solid, and Sherman, you look hurt. Do you need a break? It is very warm in this room. You will notice that I am bright red.
I'm so happy.
I am bright red because I flush when I get warm, and I'm wearing a lab coat for some reason.
So comfortable.
So thankfully, we will be in a place with air conditioning soon. But other than that, I'm out of conversation topics and ideas. I think this has been a fantastic show. I think the audience is going to learn a whole lot, especially when they go back and rewatch it and take notes and all that academic stuff.
Awesome. And that was actually my hope. My hope is to inspire you, Sherm, but also you, audience, you, the viewer at home, to work on whatever story has been nipping you at the back of your head, because it's your story. It's not anyone else's story. You're the only one who can tell it. And sure, it might look like someone else's story, but you bring your own perspective to it. You have, you yourself can tell this tale. Your perspective is valuable. We want to see it. So please go out there, go write. Please, if you can take any, if any of my advice helps you, please, by all means, take it, and share it too. Or share, even in the comments, your own writing tips or your own experiences with writing. I think that all of us aspiring writers will be better off that way.
100% agreed. And I think the perfect final line for us to say goodbye to Nutmeg for the night is Persona Christ's final pun. Nutmeg, your advice really took the cake tonight.
Oh.
Perfection. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Nutmeg.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to go ahead and put you on mute for the close of the show. You can hang out for 5 minutes. We'll debrief after I sign off. Cool?
All right.
Bye. And with that, everybody, I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you did, upvote it on the wiki if you are a member. If you enjoyed the show, like the stream. We're at 49 likes. We're almost to 50. I hope you had fun. Hope you learned something. We will see you in the next stream. Remember to like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff on your Foundation Encrypted YouTube account. And this has been Dr. Theron Sherman. I will see you in the next video.
It's not stealing if you're credited.
Talk to me, baby. I'm going blind from this sweet, sweet craving. Whoa. Let's lose our minds and go fucking crazy. I keep on hoping we'll eat cake by the ocean.